There's films up in the loft.
Well,
so just tell us about that.
Well, the police weren't the first people to get there, were they? Like, the first people to get there were Rudy Altabelli, who's the owner of Cielo Drive, who claims to be in the mafia and is a drug dealer.
Right.
Jack Nicholson, the actor,
Yeah.
and Robert Evans, the producer. Robert Evans.
Were the police not there in the morning?
This has never been sort of like, the timeline's very, very strange about this. They turned up and cleaned the place, right? Robert Evans, for people that don't know, okay, is a film producer who's
because people might not be following this. This is a murder scene of 5 people who've been gruesomely murdered, right, with knives, and some shot and strung up by the neck in the living room. Very, very gruesome scene. Yeah. Which you think was a drug deal stroke robbery gone wrong, perhaps, right? All the details are in the book. We haven't got time to go in the murder scene and all of that,
we'll get
because it's all in the book, the murder scene and the evidence of the phone line being cut and the position of the various victims and all of that, right? It's all in all that detail. But this is an extremely gruesome murder scene. Yeah. You're saying that there's possibly Jack Nicholson,
the actor, Robert Evans, the world famous producer, and Rudy Altabelli, who's the owner of the property,
right, are possibly turned up at the property before the police, and they're trying to
they sanitize
turned up on
the
murder scene.
Well, this is what they said. This is admitted that they turned up and they cleaned the place so that Roman Polanski wouldn't be horrified when he arrived. What's really strange is that when Roman Polanski actually came back, Robert Evans, who was his friend, he put him up in a suite at the Hollywood studio that he was working, that had just recently been vacated by Julie Andrews. He charged him for it, though. Top whack. Rudy Altabelli, who'd been there to clean up and get rid of the blood stains so that Roman Polanski wouldn't have to see this horrific scene. Yeah. Except he didn't get rid of the blood stains. Pig was still written on the door. The blood was on the carpet. Rudy Altabelli kept the blood stains as they were for the entire time that he stayed at the property. In fact, it wasn't until the 90s that the door was finally sold on to Trent Reznor, and he used to show his guests, look, this is Sharon Tate's blood. He sued Roman Polanski for ruining his decor and refused to give him back his deposit.
Right. Well, I've seen an interview. I watched an interview with Roman Polanski with Clive James, I think it was, and it's, butter wouldn't melt in his mouth like in that interview, and but he's rumoured to have been into drugs and making strange films.
Ferdinand Main,
basically. Kind you see on the movies.
Yeah.
So tell us what was found in the loft.
Oh, right, sorry, yeah. Porn, essentially.
Homemade porn.
Homemade celebrity porn. Now, again, this is one of the things that Manson talks about Dennis Wilson owning a VCR-type player on which they would watch traded celebrity porn. He makes reference to Jane Fonda trying to get him in bed.
Now, hang on a minute. There will be, I know I'll get emails from that, VCR, 1960.
Whatever, a tape-playing machine.
Which were available, if you had a lot of money in 1969, there was technology that you could buy, it cost a fortune, to be able to record and play in your own house. So it probably wasn't an actual VCR.
No, that type of thing. But that's the point. It was so incredibly out there for someone to have something like that.
But someone like Polanski would have all that.
Well, he apparently did, as did Dennis Wilson. The Manson group were proven to be filming pornography in various places, but essentially what was found at Cielo Drive and denied initially, and then basically they told a sort of half story, which was there was one film that was Roman Polanski making love to his wife Sharon. What was actually revealed by a detective called Hal Lipsett throughout later on was that the LAPD got there and seized these tapes and then were trying to sell them on. And these were pornography tapes. There were tapes like, there was an orgy with Mama Cass, Warren Beatty and Yul Brynner. There was a homosexual tryst between Peter Sellers and Yul Brynner.
So Peter Sellers is having sex with Yul Brynner?
Apparently in this film. This has been confirmed again by a number of people, including, in the interview with Ronald Reagan Jr., Charles Manson basically says, did he tell you about that? Did he tell you about Yul Brynner and Peter Sellers in the closet with each other?
Let me just play devil's advocate. Yeah. Why would all of these celebrities with these? Because Peter Falk is involved as well in one of them, is he?
No, Peter Falk was basically. The suggestion is that he hooked up with Manson whilst he was working on this film about Jesus with Gary Stromberg.
Right.
When Manson was in Vacaville, which was after the murders and stuff like that, he was put on some really heavy tranquilizers and started writing letters to loads of people, revealing all these celebrities that he used to know. And he claims, he wrote to a bloke called Bill Dakota, who was in this gossip magazine in Hollywood. And in this letter, he claims that whilst he was at Universal Studios, he had sexual liaisons with Peter Falk, and the Robert Conran, who was the lead actor in Wild Wild West. Columbo and Wild Wild West.
So Manson claims to have had sex with Columbo.
Yeah.
Right.
Interestingly, Columbo turned up every single day of the trial.
Yeah, this is what it's mentioned in the book, that Columbo's there watching this trial.
Yeah.
Right. And a whole load of other
celebs turned up, yeah.
Steve McQueen?
Steve McQueen was, well, I think Steve McQueen avoided it because, but he certainly was interested in it. Because at one point,
there's a
Keith
lot of
Moon told him that some of the Manson lot were hiding under his house. Keith Moon was his next door neighbour.
Right. So a lot of sort of celebrities who might have been involved in making such films or taking drugs.
Yeah.
They're being protected?
Very possibly. I mean, what happened was basically the LAPD tried to sell these tapes. They kept them for a while, declined that they existed, and then a few years later they were trying to sell them. And a private investigator called Hal Lipsett apparently got hold of some copies of this and made this public, at which point it all sort of disappeared. Because
So why would a celebrity do that then? Because they're just compromising themselves.
Have you seen Paris Hilton?
Paris Hilton. What, the film?
Well, yeah, you know, people make sex tapes.
Like, yeah. Well, yes, of course. But what, are they're just under the influence? Do you think it was maybe they didn't think because camcorders were not readily available at the time?
It
was a new thing.
Yeah,
maybe.
It's a bit of excitement. You know, they're all. You know, there's this ongoing party that's at Terry Melcher's house, and
they're all on God knows what drugs.
And the mamas and the
papas. Brings the camera out.
Yeah, absolutely, and they have an orgy. I mean, this was a time when orgies and free sex was a concept that was out there. This is partly sort of the concept of the commune and stuff like that. That it gives you the opportunity to be involved in that type of sex. I mean, that's essentially what attracted Dennis Wilson to the Manson group. An interesting point about the Manson orgies was that they were bisexual.
Yeah, because Manson wasn't bothered, was he? He would have it off for men as well, wouldn't he?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a strong suggestion that was another reason why they had to sort of like distance the Beach Boys from the case and to introduce the concept of the Beatles. Was because basically Manson and Dennis were lovers.
Do you think that then? Was it refuted by Wilson?
No, he died before he basically drowned, before he could, nobody really ever asked him. There's a whole series of quotes from other people that are probably a bit too graphic for me to say on this programme, but they're in the book, indicating sexual acts involving Manson and Dennis Wilson. People like Sandy Good, who was a follower of Manson, has said in various interviews that basically Dennis loved Manson. They were really, really in love. Manson was asked basically when he was on trial, if you could see Dennis right now, what would you say to him? He says, I wouldn't say anything. I'd just make love to him.
Right. All right. Now, just one other thing. We're not saying that Manson's we're not letting him off the hook for being a very dangerous
he's an incredibly dangerous person, yeah.
Because you believe he did murder at least one person.
I think he was,
and slashed the face of Hinman.
He slashed the face of Gary Hinman. I believe he was present for the murder of Abigail Folger and Wojciech Wachowski. Right. I believe that he was involved in some sort of murder when he was younger in Mexico. And he certainly shot Bernard Lotzapapa Crow and believed that he'd killed him. So, I mean, that's the sort of thing. I think the best thing would be if I now just explain sort of how it sort of spiraled from the Gary Hinman case and explained exactly what happened. The Manson group had got in with a group called the Straight Satan's Motorcycle Gang. The Straight Satan's Motorcycle are kind of like the Hells Angels. They're a 1% outlaw biker gang. They move drugs. They basically were involved in pornography to an extent through people like Bill Vance and then also the shifting of drugs. You know, they move speed and various things like that. Bikers doing and stuff like that. And they became sort of interconnected. Danny DiCarlo, who was the treasurer of the Straight Satan's Venice ranch, was actually staying with them. He was the person that brought all the guns to the ranch and stuff like that. Now, why were they stripping down cars? Why were they stripping down dune buggies or making dune buggies? Well, if you look at the path of the Manson family, they'd go down to Mexico, down Texas, onto the coast, up and down the west coast, up and down the west coast, up and down the west coast, down to Alabama, back, up and down the west coast, up and down the west coast, down to sort of near the Mexican border. They're going there, they're picking up drugs from Mexico, they're coming back, and then they're selling them up and down the coast, whilst he's also pimping these girls out. So why would they be having dune buggies? Well, because dune buggies are perfect for that sort of terrain, for getting across the desert, avoiding the police, avoiding other less, versatile vehicles, and basically allowing you to get to Mexico and back. And it's also, again, admitted by people like Patricia Krenwinkel and stuff like that Manson was pimping out the girls, that he had different stratas of girls. He had his front porch girls, he had his back porch girls, which is,
And he would use them to gain influence with certain people.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, because of this car ring and because of this drugs and prostitution, he has a sort of alliance with the Straight Satans. Now, the Straight Satans, Bobby Bosley wants to impress them, so he goes to his mate, Gary Hinman, and buys $1,000 worth of mescaline, and he goes to the Straight Satans. He says, right, okay, fair enough. Here you go, here it is. They turn up the next day and claim that this is a bad batch and it's caused all sorts of problems. And they say to Bobby, you need to go and get our money back now. In fact, if you don't go and get our money back, we're going to kill you. So Danny DiCarlo tells him, you need to go and get the money off Gary Hinman. If he doesn't give you the money back, kill him, otherwise we're going to kill you. And he gives him a gun in which to do it. So Danny DiCarlo is the motivation behind this crime. Bobby goes. Now, Bobby doesn't intend to kill Gary Hinman because, how do we know this? Because he takes Susan Atkins and Mary Bruner with him, who are friends with Gary. He expects to turn up, explain the situation, get the money and leave. He turns up and Gary's getting ready to go on a trip abroad. I think he's going to Japan because he's into like Buddhism and stuff like that. And he says and Bobby says, you need to give me this money. And he says, well, I ain't got it. I can't give you the money. Give me the drugs back and I'll test them. Oh, I ain't got the drugs. So, well, you're putting me in a bit of a situation here, Bobby, because, I haven't really got anything. Bobby panics and they get into a bit of a fight and he shoots off the gun. That sort of settles everybody down. Everyone's like, oh, God, this has got really stupid. We're all friends. This is daft. All of a sudden, there's a knock on the door. Now, unbeknownst to Bobby and Gary, in the panic, Mary has phoned Charles at the ranch. She's phoned Charlie and basically said, Charles Manson, and said, oh my God, it's all kicking off. Can you please come down here and help? He's run down with a chap called Bruce Davis, knocked on the door, and the second Gary Hinman's answered the door, he smacked him in the face with a sword and gone, there you go, that's how you be a man, that's how you sort the situation out. He then basically understands that they've already come to a conclusion. Gary hasn't got the money, but he's going to say, well, take my cars, take my 2 cars, sell them. There you go, problem solved. Everyone's got the money. So Manson goes off in the car. Now, at this point, Gary Hinman's a little annoyed that he's been smashed in the face with a knife, and he's cut his ear and he's got a big cut down his face that Bobby Bosley stitches up with dental floss. Right. And he's like, this isn't going to do. I need to go to the hospital. And you know what? I'm sick of this, actually. When I go to the hospital, I'm telling the police because Manson's, slashed me in the face. Yeah. Bobby's getting into a real panic because if he starts talking about Manson, it's going to expose the mescaline, it's going to expose the Straight Satans. Bobby's going to cop for it from Danny DiCarlo. So he panics and he stabs Gary Hinman to death. Well, he actually phones up Manson and says, what should I do? And Manson basically says, do what you want. You're your own person. And the prosecution inferred that Manson had ordered him to kill Gary.
Well, let's just come on to that aspect, Neil, about Manson ordering the murders, right? Because if I said to you, Neil, I want you to go and kill whoever, right? Yeah. Right? And you do it, right? Am I then on trial for murder?
This is the contradiction that was one of the many contradictions of the case, was that basically the people who did the murders were not under their own cognizance. They were influenced by it. So they were innocent of that, but then they were actually found to be guilty of it. So the two.
So this is what they were trying to. I mean, to me, I could be wrong here, but legally this seems unprecedented to me that you've got someone up for murder who wasn't even at the scene.
Yes.
Right. You think he might have gone back to the scene with them.
Yeah, I
right?
do.
And I think it's widely believed that he wasn't at either, well, certainly the first murder scene.
Well, Vincent Bugliosi made a point of that in court, saying that Manson was never at the scene, because if Manson was at the scene, it negates the entire cult aspect of it. I mean, that's another point about the Bernard Crowe killing, is that basically, which came after the Gary Hinman thing. The other point about the trial...
Let me just stay on the legal point just for a second. So, surely it doesn't say in the law that just because you're commanding, let's use that word, commanding, through whatever means it is, whether it's hypnosis or whether it's manipulation or whatever.
It shouldn't alleviate the responsibility.
It shouldn't take the responsibility off that person and put it onto you.
Exactly.
For murder.
No.
Which is what they would seem to be trying to do in that. What they were trying to do in that case.
Absolutely.
And succeeded, yeah?
They absolutely succeeded. Now, there is an argument that basically the defence could have responded to this, and there was lots and lots of holes in the case. I mean, the very... Vincent Bugliosi basically came up with the theory of helter-skelter after talking to Paul Watkins and Danny DiCarlo, and he admitted that it sounds fantastic, but he needed a fantastic motive in order to sell this incredibly strange crime. Perhaps the defence could have actually countered this, except, and this is not a widely known fact, but in a trial that lasted over a year, the defence lasted for as long as it takes to say the defence rests.
Right, so there was no defence put?
There was absolutely no defence case put. Right. And what was very strange as well was that basically everybody that had any connection to the group, including the Mamas and the Papas and various other sort of Hollywood groups, they were all subpoenaed to be witnesses for the defence. Now, what does that mean? It means they can't talk to the press. It means that if you talk to the press, basically you are in contempt of court, and so you'll go to prison. So if you blanket everybody, it means that basically nobody can say, hang on, this isn't actually what happened.
So where does Bernard Crowe fit into this, Neil?
Right, well, Bernard Crowe was a drug dealer that lived, sort of had his premises in Hollywood, right next to where Three Star Enterprises used to be, and he actually knew Tex. We knew all of them.
Tex is the guy who really did do the murders.
Yeah, Tex is the guy that is basically portrayed as being Manson's right-hand man, like his lieutenant. If you actually look at it, he was living at Dennis Wilson's house before Manson was there, because he was a drug dealer and very possibly a rent boy as well. But he left the ranch quite a lot. Manson didn't like him. He was back at the ranch for a very, very short period of time, at which point he put hooks up with a girl called Linda Kasabian. But most of the time he was living in Hollywood with a girl called Rosina, who was his girlfriend, and a prostitute. And he was ripping off all the drug dealers. Tex was known to be a standover man, by which he basically would go and rob all the drug dealers of their wares. Because what are you going to do? Go to the police? No, of course you're not. Tex was not a nice guy. Tex was like well known to be violent and involved in all sorts of stuff like that. Basically, after sort of like annoying everyone on the ranch and being kicked off of the ranch, he goes back to Hollywood and starts living with his girlfriend Rosina. Rosina steals some money from him. She gets pregnant, or she claims that she's pregnant, and takes the money for the abortion and just basically rips Tex off. Tex is really annoyed, so he wants to make some money and get back at his girlfriend. So he phones up Bernard Crowe and says, I've got a brick of weed here for you. It costs you, I forget exactly how much, but basically a significant amount of money. I'll go and get it.
A brick of weed, that is a brick-sized piece of compressed marijuana, yeah?
Yeah. Right. He's got a serious amount of of marijuana or cannabis for him. Right. And Bernard Crowe pulls up outside the front of this house with Tex in the car. Tex says, it's in there, give me the money, goes in, walks straight out the back door, gets into a car with his mate TJ Wallerman, and they drive off. About 20 minutes later, Bernard Crowe realises he's been ripped off, and he knows that...
And he's dropping his own girlfriend in it.
She's left there as the hostage, basically to prove that he won't do it. So Bernard Crowe phones up the ranch where he knows that Charles Tex Watson has been living. He says, I want to speak to Charles. They assume he means Charlie, Charles Manson, so Charlie answers the phone, and he says, I've got this girl here, I'm going to cut her head off, right? And then I'm going to come down to the ranch, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to rape all the women, I'm going to burn the house down unless you give me Tex or the money immediately. And Manson's like, turns to Tex and goes, have you just done this? He says, yeah. It's like, well, go and sort it out. He says, no, I'm not doing that. And he runs off. Can I just point out, what sort of cult leader is that? Okay. Also, by this time, Susan Atkins has been kicked off the ranch and she's going and living with Mama Cass of the Mamas and the Papas because she keeps giving people incredibly virulent VD. Like, and people are getting annoyed with her. So this cult leader can't raise anybody. Danny DiCarlo won't go. Nobody will go. So he basically takes this 22 buntline gun, which was basically then used in the Sharon Tate murders. This gun, by the way, was once owned by Ronald Reagan, the President of the United States. When he was an actor in the cowboy films, he used this gun. He gave it to a chap called Randy Starr. Randy Starr went and lived at the ranch, and he gave it to Charles Manson.
There's a lot of names here. It is quite hard to keep up with, and there's hundreds of names in this book. And you need a great big chart.
It's a complicated story.
Yeah, it is a complicated story.
But basically, so he goes to Bernard Crow's house and says, look, what's going off here? Bernard Crow's not there, so he walks in and he starts untying Rosina and makes a cup of coffee. Bernard Crow comes back, they get into a tussle, and Manson whips out this gun and points it at him, and he fires it. Now, whether he intends to kill him or not, we don't know, but the gun doesn't go off. And then Manson goes, well, you know, that's just me showing you. It's an empty gun, it's a thing. Bernard Crow doesn't take too kindly to this, and so starts to strangle Manson, at which point the gun goes off and shoots him in the chest.
Right.
Bernard Crow falls to the ground. Manson goes and takes his jacket off of him, he takes it off his friend, and then they leave. Now, unbeknownst to them, the friend of Bernard Crow knows Greg Jacobson. Greg Jacobson is the producer that works with Dennis Wilson. And so he phones up Dennis Wilson and Nick Grillo and goes, have you heard what's happened? Charlie's just killed some black guy. And so they go, oh no, this is going to cause a problem. So they immediately put a halt on Bobby Beausoleil's album and Charles Manson's album. Okay, so that's where the concept of his rejection from the music industry comes from, that they put a stop on it. Whether this would have actually got released once he discovered that Bernard Crow wasn't dead is a completely other thing. But the idea that he was rejected by the music industry is nonsense, because at the same time he was being courted by Neil Young, who also wanted, and Frank Zappa, who were also trying to get him record companies with record contracts with various people. Anyway, so this goes back, and this has totally sort of ruined everything. So he's particularly annoyed with Tex at this point. He doesn't like Tex anyway. Tex has really gnaws this up for them all. At which point, Bobby Beausoleil is arrested for, along with Susan Atkins, for the murder of Gary Hinman. And at the time, it's a bit strange because Manson's off at the time with a girl called Stephanie Schramm. Stephanie Schramm, in all the books, is basically how he fell in love with her because she's of her Teutonic Germanness and her pure Aryan stock, which is to indicate that Charles Manson was a racist, which is why he got this helter-skelter thing going off. The only problem with that is that Stephanie Schramm's Jewish.
Right.
So that doesn't quite think. A lot of people will be going, we know Manson's racist, Neil. He's got a swastika on his forehead. That swastika was taken from a gentleman, an Indian, American Native American that he knew called Walks on Top.
It started off as a cross, though, didn't it?
He started off as a cross, yeah, and then he basically, once he got in with the Aryan Brotherhood in prison for protection because he was known as a racist, he put it as a left-facing swastika. Then later, when it was burned off by somebody who tried to kill him, he had it tattooed back on, and it was put the other way around. Whether this was on purpose or a mistake, we don't know. But he has always maintained that it's not a swastika, it's a sun wheel that is there to protect him from white men. And he actually got this from Walks on Top, who was a Native American that he knew whilst he was in prison. Further to that, there's a suggestion, if you actually look at the Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, everybody except for Linda Kasabian rejects Helter Skelter as being not an actual real thing. And they actually say that Charlie wasn't really racist. He was perhaps a white separatist, which obviously is terrible, but he wasn't as racist as people make out, and he was a bit more nuanced. He actually knew black drug dealers that he interacted with, but he didn't like sexual mixing. Again, it's not a good thing, like, okay, but it's more nuanced than is presented. When he was in prison, one of his good friends was Geronimo Pratt, the Black Panther. In fact, on at least 2 occasions, Charles Manson saved the life of Geronimo Pratt. This is in Geronimo Pratt's own autobiography. So anyway, he's really, really annoyed with Tex. and he finds out that Bobby gets arrested, and he's going to need some money, a lawyer or something like that. He owes Bobby a favour because he messed up the Gary Hinman thing. Tex owes him a favour. So he basically goes to Tex, he says, you owe Bobby a favour. That's it, done. It's nothing to do with me anymore. I'm off to San Diego with this young Jewish girl, right? Tex decides that basically he's been knocking about with this girl called Linda Kasabian. Linda Kasabian's just been on the ranch for about a week or something like that. In the time that they have been together as a couple, they've been to visit Wojtek Rakowski. Wojtek Rakowski has basically imported a load of this new drug called MDA from 3 Canadian drug dealers, one of them named Billy Doyle. Now, unbeknownst to him, this is a particularly bad batch. The bad batch is sold on to Linda Kasabian. According to various members of the Manson family, they basically have said this is what happened. And she's really annoyed with this. Wojtek's not too plussed either, and basically he takes Billy Doyle to a party at Mama Cass's house. Billy Doyle was also a boyfriend of Mama Cass, and ties him to a tree and rapes him in front of the celebrity crowd there that included Michelle Phillips and very possibly Dennis Hopper as well, and films the incident as punishment for supplying them with the bad drugs. These bad drugs end up at Linda Kasabian, and so this is the motivation for Linda and Tex to go and rob Wojtek. They know that Jane...
Wojtek was in the Tate household, was
yeah, he was living there.
So he was one of the people who was living at the house where the murders took place.
Yeah, he was Abigail Folger's boyfriend. He was a good friend of Roman's from back home, and basically he was trying to break into the movie industry. This didn't work, so he decided to try and break into the drugs industry because he saw that Jay Sebring had made such a fortune selling cocaine to people like Steve McQueen, Peter Sellers, Warren Beatty, you know, all the same people that we're talking about, Cary Grant.
So that was the motivation for going to that house?
Yeah, and Dean Martin. In fact, William Scanlon Murphy, who was a keyboard player for the Beach Boys, basically said that he knew that $20,000 worth of cocaine was going to be dropped off there for Sebring to sell that night. And Tex knew this, and so he turned up to try and rob this. Now, this is actually borne out by the fact that Cary Grant turned up to buy some LSD on the night. And we know this because his business manager admitted this. Cary Grant was in the garden of Cielo Drive with a rent boy, heard screams, thought better of it, ran off. Steve McQueen was supposed to turn up like to buy cocaine that night, but actually got sort of waylaid with a teenage girl at the Whiskey A Go-Go, and so decided not to go. So Tex, basically they decide to go and rob this thing. Now here's a really interesting point. Robert Evans, the producer, he was supposed to be looking after Sharon, and so he would go round to the house every day to make sure that she was safe. That one particular night, the only time he didn't turn up to the house, he decided to phone instead. And Sharon said, I'm not going to be staying here tonight. I'm going over to stay at my friend Sheila Wells's house. About quarter to 12, she changed her mind, and so she stayed there. Now, this is particularly strange for two reasons. One, if you know about the Cotton Club murders and Bill Menser claimed that Roy Radin was killed. He was a movie producer who had stolen a load of money and drugs from Robert Evans. Bill Menser claimed that Robert Evans had told him to do it. The other person that was involved in the Cotton Club murders was a woman called Lainey Jacobs, who was good friends of Dennis Wilson. So again, you see all these people sort of intertwined. Bill Menser was probably connected to the Son of Sam murders and connected to Mama Cass, basically.
So what do you say to people who say, no, the murder scene of the Tate murders, that was a ritualistic or satanic there was a scene because it was so, the way that they were strung up and the messages that were written, that was, there was a ritual there?
No, I don't contend that at all. I think that comes from how that started was basically because there was a headline in the Los Angeles press that said ritual type slaying at Hollywood home, and there was a suggestion that they had hoods put over their heads, which wasn't true. It was a towel that was laid over Sebring's face. But yeah, no, I don't believe that. In the actual original police report, it shows that it doesn't look like it was a robbery. Obviously, people make a big deal about they called up and they slit a telephone line, and then they went in through a window that they cut. That was never in the original police report. In fact, there were 2 open windows right next to this supposedly cut screen. The original police report has them walking in the front door. Right. Now, what's strange, in the official story, the first person to die was a chap called Stephen Parent. They turned up at this house at random, saw this lad driving down the drive, and says, right, okay, stop, bang. And he was stabbed and shot by Tex, apparently. Right. This isn't borne out by the evidence. The evidence shows that actually this kid's reversed down the drive at such speed that he's nearly gone over a ravine, and he's destroyed a fence as he's done it, as if he's trying to get away from the house. What happens, and we also know that the phone line wasn't cut before the murders happened, because there was a call placed just after 12 from Cielo Drive to Witold K, who was a friend of Roman Polanski's. So what actually happened is essentially Tex has turned up and he's basically said to Jay Sebring, we want all these drugs, we want all this money, whatever you've got. And his plan was to take Jay to his home on Eastern Drive. Eastern Drive is where he lived, at which point Sharon's panicked and tried to make a run for it. Tex, who's high as a kite on meth, which is also forbidden by Manson, which again goes to show what...
So just, Manson forbade certain types of
hard drugs, yeah,
within his group?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, which obviously they paid no attention at all to.
Right.
Yeah, she makes a run for it, and Tex stabs at her. And we know this because basically the timeline, the police have someone shouting at about 1:15, oh God, no, please don't, and a woman screaming. There's then a large pool of blood on the front porch, which suggests that basically Sharon's tried to run for it, he's stabbed her, and then he's punched or stabbed Jay, and they've both lain over the bushes at the front of the house. At which point, Stephen Parent, who's been watching this, has decided to drive away. Somebody runs up to him and slashes him with a knife. Now, if you look at the people that were there and the weapons that they actually had, it transpires that it probably wasn't the Tex that slashed him, it was probably Linda Kasabian, because she had a knife and was outside. Linda Kasabian then became the state's witness, became completely immune from prosecution.
So did she get to go to prison at all?
No, not at all.
Right.
She was up for 7 counts. She was on death row, and then when Susan Atkins changed her mind and said that this story is all bull, they offered that immunity to Linda Kasabian instead. Right. So basically what's happened is this has all happened at sort of about 1:15. We know this because that's when Stephen Parent's watch stopped after he was stabbed. This goes completely against the official story, which has it half an hour earlier. About 10 minutes later, they're outside this place called the Weber's house, where they got picked up. They were washing their hands apparently on the hose. Now, one of the things that they don't talk about the Weber's house is the Weber's house backs onto Jay Sebring's house. So what's happened is they've gone there to rob Jay Sebring. It's gone wrong. They've stabbed whatever. They've taken whatever they can, and then they've gone over to try and get into Jay Sebring's house. They've got caught by their neighbours, and so they've driven home. Okay, at which point they've got back, and Manson's back with Stephanie Schramm. And they talk about it, and they suddenly realise they've left 2 people alive and a whole plethora of clues over there. So they get back in the car, at which point Linda drives them over, with Tex hiding in the back of the seat of the car. And they then shoot Wojtek Wachowski and Abigail Folger and stab them to death. And we know this to be true because, again, the police report has gunshots and screams at about 3-4 in the morning, which, again, completely destroys the official story. It also shows, though, that Manson was at least present for 2 of the murders. So, you know, he's not innocent by any stretch of imagination. He's not a nice guy. Yeah. That's what's essentially happened.
Right. All right. Well, let's come on to just quickly. Do you think there was those tapes that were found in the loft? Did they have any paedophilia or bestiality in them?
Right, okay. Wish was about 14. Ruth Ann Morehouse was about 14. These are girls that are involved in the group. Right. Okay, so there was underage sex going on. Right, okay. There was a lot of... These were teenage girls, right, okay. And this is another point, okay. Dennis Wilson's having orgies.
Let me interject again. But that tape never surfaced at the trial or was never discussed.
Oh, no, well, no.
So there was things being hidden from the trial to protect celebrities.
Well, these other cases... Well, again, yeah, absolutely there was. I mean, that's the point.
So do you think the mafia basically closed ranks, appointed the lawyers paid for the lawyers because there was a whole load of people's reputations on the line.
Yeah.
If the absolute truth had come out with this.
Yeah.
And the whole Manson is a guru mind control leader.
Yeah. It's because they had to create a motive that was as far away from the real motive, which is essentially just a grubby drugs murder that exposed all these seamy Hollywood things, and they had to appropriate him as a cult leader. So
now, where's the name?
Krishna Venter.
And you think that they used Krishna Venter as kind of a
template,
a cutout, a template. So just briefly tell us.
Krishna Venter was a real cult leader that lived in Box Canyon, which is just down the road from Chatsworth, which is where the Spahn Ranch was, prior to
about 20 years earlier.
Yeah, about 20 years earlier. Now, he believed that he was Jesus. He also believed that he was the devil. He also believed that basically all the women in his harem should sleep with him, and that he was that was the whole point. They were supposed to venerate him like that. He would hang off a cross and do crucifixion rituals. He would encourage them to have orgies and encourage them to use hallucinogenic drugs. He strongly believed that a race war was on the cards, where the black people would fight against the white people. He felt it would be the Russians, but same principle. At which point Krishna Venter's posse would disappear into the desert behind Box Canyon and hide in the mountains until such time that their group swelled to the number of 144,000, at which point they would come back. It's pretty familiar.
So they've taken a lot of the detail from his story and apportioned it to Manson.
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, the prosecution witness, Paul Watkins, who was nowhere near the ranch or anything. He'd been sent away to live with a Scientologist called Paul Crockett at the time. But all of a sudden, because all this publicity was happening, he sort of ingratiated himself with Vincent Bugliosi to get some sort of power. Danny DiCarlo had already been telling them that Manson was a Nazi, and then Paul Watkins told him about Krishna Venter and the Beatles. And so from this, Vincent Bugliosi was able to cobble together this concept of a cult leader and give a motive that is crazy, but not too crazy if you think of all the race wars and race riots that have been going off and stuff like that, that basically just sidestepped all the actual salacious gossip.
So what about people who say that they think Manson was a victim of MK Ultra, which is a CIA-run mind control program?
I don't think that he was, and the reason I say that is because he was in Vacaville, which we know that they did mind control experiments, but he wasn't in Vacaville until after the trial. It's entirely... I wouldn't say that it was impossible, but I haven't seen any evidence of it. I haven't seen any evidence of the institutions that he was in doing that types of experimentation, and I've not seen anything that would suggest that he would. I would suggest that two things happened. One, he's a pimp. And so essentially there is a degree of mind control with that. If you look at the girls and the way that basically they talk about him and they really venerate him, then go and watch American Pimp or Hookers at the Point or Pimps Up, Hose Down or any of these documentaries and look at the way that the girls react to their pimps. And it's remarkably similar. If we think of Manson as a drug-dealing pimp, it all of a sudden makes, oh, well, that's where he's getting the money from. Oh, well, that's why he's able to ingratiate himself with these celebrity circles. Oh, that's why they're so loyal to him, etc., etc., etc. And that certainly explains why basically all these people went against him all the time and acted in ways that weren't like as if he was a cult leader, certainly if they didn't think that he was Jesus. But the aspect of MK Ultra that I do believe happened is to do with the Weather Underground, in as much as during the trial, Manson wasn't really that sort of nobody really cared that much until the Weather Underground, which was this left-wing break-off of the SDS run by Bernardine Van Doren, started praising Manson as a revolutionary hero and saying that basically 1969 is the year of the fork and that these rich pigs deserve to die and stuff like that. And I think that basically there's a lot of suggestion that the Weather Underground is basically either infiltrated or formed by the CIA as a way to demonise other leftist groups like the SDS, like the Black Panthers, etc., etc., else, and tar everybody on that particular side of the fence with this violent brush. And I think what they did was they got lemons and they made lemonade. They saw this grubby drugs murder felt that Vincent Bugliosi had spun this nice cult leader thing, and then what the government did, the aspect of MK Ultra that I believe took place was that they used this to demonise the concept of communal living, the concept of anti-war movement. And
so clearly your book illustrates quite well that the trial was staged, managed, let's put it that way.
Oh, totally.
And the narrative was largely made up by the prosecution lawyer. But those behind that and motivating that was possibly mafia connections to protect
very possibly.
Celebrities. Do you think there was any government interference with the actual trial, or you think that they just used it?
I think they just used it afterwards. Like, there is a suggestion that the FBI was involved, but if you look at the sort of the quotes from it, I don't think the FBI had a motive to do it. I think it was the mafia that had a motive to not get their name put out there. And there's certain quotes from Manson as well. Manson says at one point, Vincent Bugliosi came to me from Geneva with his plot of Helter Skelter, and he promises to give me sunshine if I'll just go along with it. Right, okay, again, that sounds nonsensical. And so you sort of break it down. It's like, Helter Skelter is obviously the concept that you're a hippie cult leader. We're going to play you this, okay, and you just go along with it and everything will be cool and you'll get some sort of benefit in prison. Manson's an institutionalized guy, so he's quite happy in prison anyway, if we're brutally honest. The concept of coming from Geneva, I think that's what, because he uses these slangs, I think what he's saying is someone from the Genovese mafia has actually approached Vincent Bugliosi. There's numerous quotes where he points out that his Italian stock and various other people connected to the case, like Calabrero and Caruso and stuff like that. There's a running theme of mafia, and I don't think any of these people were in the mafia as such. It's just that they sort of overarch it. They're the organised syndicate behind everything, and they don't want their drugs, prostitution, and connections to Hollywood to be exposed. I mean, there's huge amounts of evidence as well that Hollywood studios use to launder money for.
It's kind of similar to the case that I investigated, the Didcot murders.
Yeah,
in one sort of respect, in that there was no trial in that case. Okay, it's just an inquest, but I'm convinced that the police and possibly intelligence agencies in the inquest ran the case to frame an innocent man because, I won't go into the full details, but there's certain information they don't want to come out, so they have to run the trial with a particular story, and all the participants have to, with that case, but at the core of it, or involved strongly in it, is drugs.
Yeah, or organised crime. So they know what the real answer is, but that's going to cause too much problems. Yeah. So they basically overlay. Yeah. If you look at the Manson case, basically, I think there's a lot of evidence that suggests the police didn't want to solve the case. They lost evidence. It was reporters that found the bloody clothes. It was a 12-year-old lad that found the murder weapon, and then the LAPD actually lost all of this evidence, only to then re-find it when the parent of that, Stephen Weiss, threatened to go to the newspapers. Yeah. I think they really didn't want to uncover it. I think they wanted to just let's just keep it out of the way.
Another case that comes to mind is the Barrymore case, because there was drugs involved in that, and Barrymore was friendly, I believe, with certain of the police, and they would turn a blind eye.
Well,
but
Jimmy Savile's Friday Morning Club, or whatever it was called, where the police would turn up and they'd smoke cannabis together.
Right, yeah. So there's a number of cases where a death or deaths have occurred, and it's not run as a proper murder investigation and all the truth brought out because the police are somewhere compromised already or involved with organised crime. Yeah. And it doesn't. So the trial never sees the truth.
Yeah. I mean, just to give you an indication of the type of person that Vincent Bugliosi is, right? Okay. After he'd made millions and millions and millions, like prosecuting Manson and selling his own book called Helter Skelter, which laid out his case, he tried to go for DA or the head of the DA at the time, and he was exposed that basically he led a campaign of harassment against this poor guy who was a milkman, and he's insane. He'd become convinced that this milkman was the father of his son.
Yeah, yeah.
And so initially,
that is a side thing in the book. Yeah.
And so basically, he tried to smear this guy and basically ruin his life. Right. And this was found out. Later, he got his secretary pregnant. Okay, and then beat the living crap out of her when she refused to get an abortion.
So this is the prosecution lawyer in the Manson case you're talking about?
Yeah, that's Vincent Bugliosi.
Right. So what's Manson's situation now then, Neil?
He's
still
prison.
alive, isn't he?
Yeah.
Right. So is he going to get out, or what's?
No, he was never going to get out. Like, in fact, Bruce Davis was given parole last year, who was one of his followers, so to speak, and it was immediately overturned by the governor of California because there's no interest in letting any of them out at all. Like, at all. Linda Kasabian, who was the main witness for the thing, she's been in and out of trouble with the police ever since. Tanya, her daughter, who she ran away from the ranch because of the murders and left there and didn't bother to get until months later, went to various communes, didn't tell anybody about the murders, didn't tell anybody that she'd abandoned her daughter. She grew up to be a drug dealer called Lady Dangerous, who has tattoos on her face.
It's just, you just think, well, you know, where's the person in all this who's coming out and is going to bring some truth or justice to a situation like that and many other trials?
Oh yeah, well yeah. I mean, but in this particular case, that will never happen. Like they're just sat waiting for Charles Manson to die in prison, essentially. Because now, even whilst he's in prison, he's constantly caught with massive amounts of weed, massive amounts of LSD, cell phones, that type of thing. Yeah. I think he's quite happy in prison. I think he's perfectly all right there. You know, ticking along. Again, just to reiterate, he's not a good guy. By any stretch of the imagination, this isn't a sort of like free Charles Manson thing.
No,
by any stretch of the imagination.
not at all. But what my concern is just the whole way that the legal profession can be compromised so comprehensively if your thesis is true, and what can be done about that. Oh no, that you didn't come here to answer that question probably, but. Because I've experienced, if you want to watch the film about the Didcot murders, because that's something that I'm much closer to in terms of having done that investigation, and I know I've spoken to Tony Bennett, the solicitor, about police corruption.
Oh,
because that ultimately, let's say in that case, if the police had not been corrupted, right, you might not have had that, although it's the legal profession as well as the police, isn't it?
Yeah.
They have to be corrupt in order for a trial to essentially spin a fantasy.
Yeah, there has to be people who are willing to turn a blind eye, isn't there? Like, basically, and yeah, I mean that's certainly evident.
Right. Okay then, Neil. Well, thanks so much for your time. We are going to do another interview on fake news and other subjects. But is there anything else you want to add just before we wrap up with the Charles Manson story?
Just that I find that the actual story is far more interesting. There seems to be the mainstream story. There's the story that there's the theory that he's connected to sort of satanic cults like the Process Church, and I discussed that in the book. We haven't got time now. And then there's the real story that actually happened, and it's seedy and it's salacious and it's complicated and it involves a huge amount of people and a very, very complicated cover-up. But I actually think that that's more interesting than the mainstream story.
So can I just ask you, when you thought, oh, this is something I want to go into detail with and do a real investigation, albeit from another country, you changed your mind on it as you were researching it. Yeah. So you believed in the mind control aspect.
Yeah. I thought that was certainly plausible, and I thought it was connected to a cult called the Process Church of Final Judgment, which is again one of the main theories. Process Church of Final Judgment. They're an offshoot of Scientology that were labelled suppressive peoples by L. Ron Hubbard, and there are certain things within their ideology that they believe that Satan and Jesus you can inhabit both parts in the same person, so you can be Jesus and Satan, which is something that Manson said. They believed in orgies, and they have a certain element of Scientology language, like coming to now and stuff like that. And Bill Mensa was certainly connected to the Process Church of Final Judgment. He was the person that was involved in the Roy Redding case. And so there's a running theme. He certainly met with the Process on a number of occasions, Brother Eli and various other people like that. And he actually probably met Robert de Grimston as well, who was the leader of this cult. And I strongly believed that was heavily involved in it. When you actually come to look at where this actually started, The reason that the Protestant church was actually brought into it was because just after Manson was arrested and this was starting to come out, tabloids all over the place were going, oh, this is interesting, this is fascinating. And they tracked down Bruce Davis, who was Manson's follower, and he was working at the Scientology temple in London, which was the main Scientology temple at that time. And so they approached the Church of Scientology. So this Manson family guy, he's a Scientologist, and this was incredibly bad PR for Scientology.